The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace, and Sergeant Marcus Cole got his first look at Velantur, Prime through the viewport. And what he saw made him forget to breathe for a moment because the planet glowed like a jewel against the darkness of space. With cities of crystal and light covering its surface in patterns that looked like art from orbit. He had been a soldier for 12 years and had seen combat on 4 different worlds. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this assignment. And he was not sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The orders had come directly from Terran Command, and they were simple enough on paper. He was to serve as part of a diplomatic security detail on the homeworld of the Velkari Empire, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. And his job was to stand around and look professional while the politicians talked about trade agreements and mutual cooperation. Marcus knew what this really meant. And it meant that someone back on Earth wanted to show the aliens that humans could play nice. That they could send a soldier to stand guard at an alien palace without starting an incident. And he had been chosen because his record was clean and his temper was controlled, and he followed orders without asking too many questions. The shuttle carried him down through clouds that shimmered with colors he had no names for. And when it landed on a platform of white stone that seemed to float in the air, Marcus stepped out and felt the weight of 3,000 years of civilization pressing down on him. From every direction, the crystal citadel rose before him like something from a dream, with towers that twisted toward the sky in spirals that should have been impossible, with bridges of light connecting structures that hung suspended over vast empty spaces, with gardens of plants that sang in the wind, and everywhere he looked there was beauty so perfect that it almost hurt to see. Velkari official met him at the landing platform, and Marcus had to crane his neck to look up at the alien because the Velkari stood nearly 8 feet tall, with bodies that were slender and covered in feathers that shifted colors as they moved, with faces that were sharp and angular and beautiful in a way that was completely inhuman, with eyes that held intelligence and judgment and something that looked very much like contempt. "You are the human soldier," the official said. And it was not a question. Sergeant Marcus Cole. "Terran Expeditionary Force," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady and professional even though every instinct told him that this creature could kill him without effort if it chose to do so. "You will follow me, and you will not speak unless spoken to, and you will not touch anything. And you will remember at all times that you are a guest in the palace of Her Eternal Majesty Empress Siravana. And if you forget these things even for a moment, then your diplomatic mission will end badly for everyone involved." Marcus nodded and followed the official into the citadel, walking through corridors of crystal and light, passing Velkari nobles who looked at him the way humans might look at a strange insect that had wandered into their home. And he kept his face blank and his shoulders straight and reminded himself that he was representing all of humanity with every step he took. They brought him to a barracks near the outer edge of the palace complex and showed him to a room that was small but clean, with a bed that was too long for his body, and a window that looked out over a garden of impossible flowers. And they told him that he would begin his duties in the morning. The next day, Marcus met the Imperial Sentinels for the first time, and he understood immediately that these were warriors unlike any he had ever known. They were Velkari, who had trained for centuries in the art of combat, who had served the Imperial family for generations, who carried weapons that could cut through starship armor and war armor that could withstand a direct missile strike. And when they looked at Marcus, they saw something small and fragile and temporary. Commander Thurl was their leader, a massive Velkari with feathers the color of midnight and eyes that burned with cold fire. And when he spoke to Marcus, his voice dripped with barely concealed disgust. "You will be assigned to the outer perimeter of Her Majesty's guard rotation," Thyrol said. And Marcus could hear what he was not saying, which was that this was the lowest position possible, the position where nothing ever happened, the position given to those who were not trusted with real responsibility. "Understood, Commander," Marcus said. And he did not argue, because arguing would accomplish nothing. Your presence here is a political gesture and nothing more, and we both know this. And I expect you to stand where you are told to stand, and to stay out of the way of those who actually know how to protect our Empress. And if you can manage these simple tasks without causing an incident, then perhaps your species will prove that it has learned something in its brief existence. Marcus spent his first week learning the rhythms of the palace, watching how the guards moved and where they positioned themselves, studying the layout of corridors and rooms and gardens, and memorizing the faces of the nobles and officials who came and went. Through the Citadel's halls he was ignored by almost everyone, and this suited him fine because it gave him time to observe without being observed in return. And what he saw began to trouble him in ways he could not quite explain. There were patterns in the way certain nobles spoke to each other, glances exchanged when they thought no one was watching, conversations that stopped suddenly when particular guards walked past. And Marcus had spent enough years in combat zones to recognize the signs of conspiracy, even when he could not understand the language it was spoken. In the Empress herself was a figure of legend, and Marcus only saw her from a distance during his first weeks at the Citadel. But even from far away, he could feel the power that radiated from her ancient form. Her feathers were silver with age, and her movements were slow and deliberate, and when she spoke the entire palace seemed to hold its breath. And she had ruled the Valkyrie Empire for 3,000 years. Through wars and plagues and disasters that would have destroyed lesser civilizations, she did not notice Marcus at all. And why would she notice him when she had guards who had served her for 500 years? When she commanded fleets that could burn worlds to ash? When her word was law for 1,000 star systems, he was nothing to her, less than nothing. A brief flicker of existence in a universe that measured time in millennia. But Marcus kept watching and kept learning and kept filing away the small details that everyone else seemed to miss. Because that was what soldiers did when they were stationed in unfamiliar territory. And something in his gut told him that this unfamiliar territory was more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit it. Night he lay in his too-long bed and stared at the alien stars through his window and wondered why he felt like a storm was coming when the sky was perfectly clear. 3 months passed, and Marcus learned more about the Valkyrie Empire than any human had ever known. Not because anyone taught him, but because he watched and listened and remembered. Everything he saw, the tensions within the empire, were ancient and deep, older than human civilization itself. And Marcus began to understand that the perfect crystal surface of Valkyrie society had cracks that ran all the way down to its foundation. The great houses had served the throne for millennia, but service did not mean loyalty. And Marcus could see the resentment in the eyes of certain nobles when they bowed to the Empress, could hear the bitterness in their voices when they spoke of tradition and duty and honor. He started staying late in the corridors after his shifts ended, finding quiet corners where he could observe without being seen. And he began to notice things that should have been impossible: imperial sentinels meeting in secret with nobles from houses that had historically opposed the throne, encrypted communications being passed through channels that bypassed the palace security systems, weapons being moved through service corridors in the dead of night, and always the same symbol appearing in the margins of documents and carved into hidden places where only those who knew to look would find Ida. Flame surrounded by broken chains. Marcus did not know what it meant, but he knew it meant something dangerous. And after weeks of gathering evidence, he decided that he had to report what he had found. He requested a meeting with Commander Tyrell and was made to wait for 6 hours before the commander agreed to see him. And when Marcus finally stood before the leader of the Imperial Sentinels, he could feel the contempt radiating off the massive, Valkyrie-like heat from a fire. "You wish to speak with me? Human. So speak and be quick about it, because I have actual duties to attend to." Marcus kept his voice calm and professional as he laid out everything he had observed. The secret meetings and the encrypted communications and the weapons movements and the symbol of the flame. And he watched Thirol's face for any reaction as he spoke. The commander listened in silence, and when Marcus finished speaking, there was a long moment where neither of them moved. And then Thirol made a sound that Marcus had learned to recognize as Valkyrie laughter. "You come to me with tales of conspiracy and treachery based on what? On shadows and whispers and the paranoid imaginings of a creature whose entire species has existed for less time than I have served in this guard. Commander, I have evidence that suggests—" "You have nothing," Tyrell interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "You have the suspicions of a mind that evolved on a world of predators. A mind that sees threats everywhere because your ancestors survived by fearing everything that moved. And you expect me to take these fever dreams seriously when the Valkyrie have maintained peace and order for 10,000 years. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level, because losing his temper would only prove the commander right about humans. "I am asking you to investigate. Commander, that is all. Just look into what I have found, and if I'm wrong, then I will accept whatever punishment you think is appropriate for wasting your time." Thyrol leaned forward, and his eyes burned with something that might have been anger, or might have been something else entirely. "Let me explain something to you. Human, something that your short-lived species cannot seem to understand no matter how many times it is explained to you. The Valkyrie do not betray each other. We do not plot in shadows like the primitive species that crawl through the galaxy's dark corners. We have evolved beyond such things. And the very suggestion that Imperial Sentinels could be involved in a conspiracy against the Empress is an insult to everything we stand for. Commander, this conversation is over. Return to your post and do not waste my time again with your paranoid human fantasies." Marcus left the commander's office knowing that he had failed. But he also left with something else, a small observation that changed everything. When he had mentioned the symbol of the flame, Thyrol's feathers had shifted color for just a moment, a brief flash of recognition that the commander had quickly suppressed. And Marcus had seen enough Valkyrie body language by now to know what that flash meant. Thyrol had recognized the symbol because Thyrol was part of the conspiracy. The realization hit Marcus like a punch to the gut, and he had to force himself to keep walking normally through the palace corridors, to keep his face blank and his body language casual, because if he was right, then he was surrounded by enemies who would kill him without hesitation if they knew what he had discovered. He tried to contact Terran Command through official diplomatic channels, but his requests were delayed and redirected and eventually denied. And he tried to request an audience with the Empress through the same channels, but was told that Her Eternal Majesty did not meet with foreign soldiers of such low rank. There was no one to turn to, and no one who would listen, and Marcus understood that he was completely alone in the most dangerous situation of his life. The Festival of Eternal Stars was approaching, the most sacred celebration in the Valkyrie calendar, and Marcus began hearing whispers about what would happen during the ceremony, fragments of conversation that stopped when he walked past, glances exchanged between guards who were supposed to be loyal to the Empress, started sleeping with his weapon beside him, and stopped eating food that had been prepared by palace staff, relying instead on the emergency rations he had brought from Earth. And every night he lay awake trying to figure out what to do when there was nothing he could do. 2 days before the festival, Marcus found what he needed, a data chip hidden in the quarters of a noble who had been careless. A chip that contained the complete plans for what the conspirators called the Awakening. They called themselves the Awakened Flame, and they believed that they, Empress, had allowed the Empire to grow weak and soft. That the Valkyrie had lost their warrior spirit. That the only way forward was to burn away the old order and build something new from the ashes. The plan was simple and brutal, and it would happen during the festival of eternal stars, when the Empress stood alone on the pillar of ancestors to perform the ancient rites, surrounded by her imperial sentinels who were supposed to protect her, but who would instead turn their weapons on her and on each other. Half the sentinels were loyal to the conspiracy, and they had been planning this for decades, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. And Commander Thyral would personally kill the Empress before the eyes of the entire Empire. Marcus read the plans and felt cold settle into his bones, because there was nothing he could do to stop what was coming. No one who would believe him. No way to save the Empress from her own guards. He thought about running, about finding a shuttle and escaping the planet before the bloodshed began, about saving himself, because no one could blame him for that, because he owed nothing to these aliens who had treated him like dirt from the moment he arrived. But something in him would not let him run. Something that had been part of him since he was a child, growing up in the ruins of a city that had been destroyed by war. Something that had driven him to become a soldier in the first place. You do not abandon your post, and you do not let innocent people die when you can do something about it, even if that something is hopeless. Even if it means dying for someone who does not know your name. Marcus checked his weapon and made sure it was fully charged, and then he sat down to wait for the Festival of Eternal Stars, knowing that he would probably not survive what was coming, but knowing also that he would not run away from it. The storm he had felt approaching was almost here, and he would face it alone. The Festival of Eternal Stars began at sunset, and Marcus had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying in his entire life. The crystal citadel transformed into a beacon of light that could be seen from orbit, with every surface glowing and pulsing with colors that seemed to dance to music that was too complex for human ears to fully understand. And millions of Valkyrie gathered in the great plaza below the Pillar of Ancestors to watch their Empress perform the rites that had been performed every year for 10,000 years. Marcus stood at his assigned position on the outer perimeter, far from the Empress and far from the inner circle of sentinels who surrounded her, and he watched with his hand resting on his weapon as the ceremony began. The Empress Siravana was magnificent as she ascended the Pillar of Ancestors, her silver feathers catching the light from 1,000 sources and reflecting it back in patterns that seemed to tell stories of ages past. And her voice rang out across the plaza in a language so old that even the Valkyrie had forgotten most of its meaning. Around her stood the Imperial sentinels in a perfect circle, their armor gleaming and their weapons held at attention. And from where Marcus stood, they looked like statues carved from living light. Eternal guardians of an eternal Empress. He counted them silently and identified the ones who were loyal to the conspiracy based on the intelligence he had gathered. And his heart sank as he realized that the traitors outnumbered the loyalists. Almost 2-1, the Empress raised her arms and began the final prayer of the ceremony, and that was when Commander Thyral gave the signal. It happened so fast that Marcus almost missed it. A single movement of Thyral's hand that should have been part of the ritual, but was something else entirely. And then the circle of sentinels erupted into chaos. Half of them turned on their brothers without warning, weapons firing at point-blank range, and the loyal sentinels died before they even understood what was happening. Cut down by warriors they had trusted for centuries, by friends and comrades who had shared meals and stories and battles across thousands of years of service. The sound of weapons fire echoed across the plaza, and for a moment the millions of Valkyrie watching did not understand what they were seeing, could not comprehend that their sacred ceremony had been torn apart by violence and betrayal. And then the screaming began. Nobles and dignitaries who had been seated in places of honor scrambled to flee, their elegant robes tangling around their legs as they pushed and shoved and climbed over each other in their desperation to escape. And the orderly crowd in the plaza below dissolved into a stampede of terrified bodies. Marcus saw ancient Valkyrie lords abandon their families without a backward glance, saw warriors who had boasted of their courage trampling the weak in their rush to reach the exits, saw 3,000 years of civilization crumble in seconds as the primal instinct to survive overwhelmed everything else. The Valkyrie were a prey species at their core, evolved from creatures who had survived by fleeing from predators rather than fighting them. And when true danger came, their bodies remembered what their minds had forgotten. Everyone ran. Everyone fled. Everyone abandoned the Empress to her fate. Commander Therill stood at the base of the Pillar of Ancestors and activated the palace communication systems to broadcast his voice across the entire empire, his words reaching every corner of Valkyrie space in an instant. Citizens of the Empire, what you are witnessing is not a tragedy, but a rebirth. For too long we have been ruled by a relic of a dead age. For too long we have allowed weakness and stagnation to poison our great civilization. And tonight the awakened flame rises to burn away the corruption and build something new from the ashes. The Empress stood alone at the top of the pillar, surrounded by the bodies of her loyal guards. And even from across the plaza, Marcus could see that she was not afraid, that her ancient eyes looked down at the traitor who had served her for 500 years with something that might have been sadness, but was not. Therill began to ascend the pillar, his blade drawn and glowing with energy that could cut through anything in the known galaxy. And Marcus knew that in moments the Empress would be dead, and the Empire would fall into chaos, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Nothing. Except him. He did not remember making the decision to move. Did not remember pushing his way through the panicked crowd. Did not remember running faster than he had ever run in his life across the plaza toward the Pillar of Ancestors. All he knew was that one moment he was standing at his post, and the next moment he was climbing the pillar, his lungs burning and his muscles screaming, pulling himself up the ancient steps while, around him, the world dissolved into fire and chaos. Therill reached the top of the pillar first and raised his blade to strike down the Empress. And that was when Marcus threw himself between them. The human soldier stood on the sacred platform, where no alien had ever been permitted to stand, his standard-issue rifle pointed at the chest of the most dangerous warrior in the Valkyrie Empire, his body positioned to block any attack on the ancient ruler behind him. Therill stopped and stared at the small creature that had appeared from nowhere to challenge him. And for a long moment, neither of them moved. "What is this?" Therill said. And his voice was filled with genuine confusion, because this was not something that was supposed to happen. This was not part of any scenario he had planned for. "Step back," Marcus said. And his voice was steady, even though his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. "You cannot be serious. Human, you are one soldier with a primitive weapon against an enemy you cannot possibly defeat. And you stand in defense of someone who has never shown you anything but contempt. What possible reason could you have for throwing away your life like this?" "I said step back." Therill laughed, and the sound was cold and cruel and completely unafraid. "Your species never ceases to amaze me with its capacity for pointless gestures. You have no stake in this conflict, no connection to this Empress, no reason to die on this pillar tonight. And yet here you stand like some ancient hero from your primitive mythology. Do you think this will mean anything? Do you think anyone will remember your name when this is over?" Behind Marcus, the Empress spoke for the first time since the betrayal began. Her voice quiet but clear. "Human soldier, you do not have to do this. You owe me nothing, and I would not have you die for my sake. Marcus did not turn to look at her because he could not take his eyes off Thyral. With respect, "Your Majesty, I am not doing this for you. I am doing this because it is the right thing to do, and because I do not know how to run away when someone needs help." Tyrell shook his head slowly, almost sadly. "Then you will die here tonight, alone and unmourned. And your brief species will learn nothing from your sacrifice, because there is nothing to learn. You are simply a fool who did not know when to accept defeat." "Maybe," Marcus said. And he adjusted his grip on his rifle and planted his feet and prepared to fight the most hopeless battle of his life. "But I would rather die a fool than live as a coward. And if you want to reach the Empress, then you are going to have to go through me first." The traitor commander studied the human soldier for a long moment, and then he smiled. A terrible smile that promised violence and pain. "Very well. Human, let us see what your species is made of." And then he attacked. Commander Thyral moved like lightning, giving form, and his first strike should have ended the fight before it began. Glowing blades swept toward Marcus in an arc that was too fast for human eyes to follow. A killing stroke perfected over 500 years of training. And there was no way that a soldier from a species that had only discovered space travel 2 centuries ago should have been able to avoid it, but Marcus had not tried to avoid it. He had thrown himself forward instead of backward, ducking under the blade and firing his rifle at point-blank range into Thyral's chest. The shot hit the commander's armor and did almost nothing, leaving a scorch mark on the surface that would have been fatal to any human soldier, but barely registered to a Valkyrie sentinel. And Thyral responded with a backhand strike that sent Marcus flying across the platform. Marcus hit the ground hard and felt something crack in his ribs, and he rolled to his feet anyway, because staying down meant dying. And he fired again and again as Thyral advanced toward him, each shot doing nothing more than annoying the massive warrior. "Is this the best your species can offer?" Thyral said. And he did not even sound winded as he deflected another shot with his blade. "Is this what passes for a warrior among humans? A small creature that cannot even scratch the honor of its enemy?" Marcus did not waste breath on a response. He just kept moving and kept shooting and kept looking for any weakness he could exploit. The Valkyrie were faster and stronger and had senses that made human perception look like blindness. But they had been warriors for so long that they had developed rules and traditions and expectations about how combat was supposed to work. And Marcus was not following any of those rules when Thyral lunged forward for a killing thrust. Marcus did not try to parry or dodge. He stepped into the attack and grabbed the commander's arm and sank his teeth into the gap between the armor. Plates at the wrist, the bite did almost no damage, but it surprised Thyral so completely that he hesitated for just a fraction of a second. And Marcus used that fraction of a second to jam the barrel of his rifle against the commander's face and pull the trigger. The shot caught Thyral in the eye, and the commander screamed and stumbled backward. And Marcus pressed his advantage, firing again and again at the wounded eye, at the joints in the armor, at anything that looked like it might be vulnerable. It was not elegant, and it was not honorable, and it was not the kind of combat that the Valkyrie had trained for across thousands of years. It was brutal and ugly and desperate, and it was the only kind of fighting that Marcus knew how to do. Thyral recovered faster than any human could have, and his next strike caught Marcus in the shoulder and spun him around. And Marcus felt the blade cut through his uniform and into the flesh beneath, but he did not stop moving, because stopping meant dying. He dropped his rifle, because his arm was not working anymore, and drew his combat knife with his other hand, a blade that looked like a toy compared to the weapon Thyral carried. And he lunged at the commander with a scream that was equal parts rage and pain. The knife found a gap in the armor at Thyral's side and sank into the hilt, and the commander roared with fury and grabbed Marcus by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "You actually hurt me," Thyral said. And there was something like wonder in his voice beneath the anger. A human actually managed to draw blood from an Imperial Sentinel. I did not think that was possible. Marcus could not breathe, and his vision was starting to go dark at the edges, but he did not stop fighting. He kicked at Tyrell's wounded side, where the knife was still buried, and he clawed at the commander's face with his one working hand, and he refused to give up, even though every rational part of his brain was telling him that it was over. "To pay you." Empress watched from behind him, and for the first time in 3,000 years, she saw something that she did not understand. A creature that should have accepted death fighting as if death was not even a possibility. A being that refused to acknowledge the reality of its own defethral. Threw Marcus to the ground, and the impact knocked the remaining air from his lungs, and he felt more things break inside him, but he was already trying to get up again. Already reaching for his knife with fingers that would not stop shaking. "Why will you not die?" Thyral demanded. And there was something in his voice that might have been frustration or might have been fear. "Why do you keep fighting when you have already lost? What is wrong with your species that you cannot accept the obvious truth that this battle is over?" Marcus managed to pull the knife from Thyral's side as he rose to his feet, and the blade was covered in alien blood that glowed faintly in the light of the festival. "It is not over until one of us stops moving," Marcus said, and his voice was a ragged whisper, but his eyes were still clear, and his grip on the knife was still steady. "And I do not know how to stop." He attacked again. The next few minutes were the longest of Marcus's life, and they were filled with nothing but pain and violence and the absolute refusal to surrender. Thyral was stronger and faster and should have killed him a dozen times over, but Marcus kept finding ways to survive. Kept trading wounds for wounds, kept turning what should have been fatal strikes into glancing blows by doing things that no sane warrior would ever do. He used his own body as a weapon, throwing himself at Thyral to disrupt the commander's attacks. He bit and scratched and headbutted and did everything that the Valkyrie would have considered beneath a true warrior. And every time he went down, he got back up again. The platform of the Pillar of Ancestors became slick with blood, both red and the glowing substance that flowed through Valkyrie veins. And the two warriors circled each other like wounded animals, neither willing to back down. Marcus's left arm hung useless at his side, and he was pretty sure he had broken ribs and internal bleeding, and his vision kept going gray at the edges. But Thyral was limping now, and one of his eyes was ruined, and there were half a dozen wounds on his body where the human's knife had found its mark. "Enough," Thyral said, and for the first time he sounded tired. "This has gone on long enough. You have proven your point, whatever point you were trying to make. Now stand aside and let me finish what I started, and I will make your death quick and painless." Marcus shifted his grip on the knife and planted his feet and shook his head. "No." Thyral stared at him for a long moment, and then made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "You are insane. Your entire species is insane. You cannot win this fight, and yet you will not stop. You will make me kill you inch by inch if that is what it takes to reach the Empress. Will you not?" "Yes." The commander raised his blade for what would be the final strike, and Marcus knew that he had nothing left. That this time he would not be able to dodge or counter or survive. That this was the end of everything, but the end did not come behind him. The Empress Siravana spoke a single word in a language that had not been heard in the galaxy for 5,000 years. And the air around the Pillar of Ancestors exploded with light and power. Thyral frozen mid-strike, his body locked in place by forces that no mortal technology could match. And around the plaza, the other conspirators found themselves similarly trapped, unable to move or speak or do anything but watch as their plans crumbled to dust. Empress had kept her true power hidden for 3,000 years. waiting for a moment when she would truly need it. And that moment had finally come. Marcus collapsed to his knees as the adrenaline finally ran out, his body giving up now that the immediate threat was over. And through the haze of pain, he heard the Empress speak to him in a voice that was soft with something that might have been wonder. "You bought me the seconds I needed. Human soldier, you held him long enough for me to act. How did you know that I could save myself if I just had a little more time?" Marcus looked up at her and managed something that was almost a smile. "I did not know, Your Majesty. I just knew that I was not going to let him kill you without a fight." And then the darkness finally claimed him, and he fell. Marcus woke to the sound of machines humming softly around him, and for a long moment he did not know where he was or how he had gotten there. The thunderous words of around him, machines humming softly around him, and for a long moment he did not know where he was or how he had gotten there. Ceiling above him was made of crystal that shifted colors slowly, and the air smelled like flowers and ozone and something else that he could not identify. And when he tried to move, he found that his body responded sluggishly, as if it had forgotten how to work. "You should not try to move yet," said a voice beside him. And Marcus turned his head to see a Valkyrie in white robes standing near his bed with an expression that he could not read. "Your body has been extensively reconstructed, and it will take time for everything to integrate properly." "How long?" Marcus asked, and his voice came out as a croak that barely sounded human. 3 weeks in our medical facilities. Your species is remarkably resilient, but even so you were very close to death when they brought you to us. Another few minutes and there would have been nothing left to save." Marcus closed his eyes and tried to remember what had happened after he fell. But everything after his conversation with the Empress was just darkness and fragments of dreams. That made no sense. "The Empress," he said, forcing his eyes open again. "Is she Her Eternal Majesty as well, thanks to you? And she has asked to be informed the moment you regain consciousness. I will send word to her immediately." The healer left, and Marcus lay in the bed trying to process everything that had happened, trying to understand how he had survived when by all rights he should be dead, trying to figure out what would happen to him now. An hour later the door to his room opened, and Empress Siravana entered. And Marcus tried to rise from the bed to show proper respect, but his body would not cooperate, and he ended up just struggling awkwardly against pillows that were too soft. "Please do not try to stand," the Empress said, and her voice was different than he remembered it, warmer and more personal. "You have earned the right to rest, Sergeant Cole, and I would not have you hurt yourself further on my account." She moved to stand beside his bed, and Marcus looked up at her ancient face and saw something there that he had never expected to see, something that looked almost like respect. "Your Majesty, I apologize for—" "Do not apologize," she said, cutting him off gently. "You have nothing to apologize for and everything to be proud of. What you did on the Pillar of Ancestors is something that will be remembered for as long as the Valkyrie Empire endures." Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. And the Empress continued speaking in that soft, warm voice. "I have ruled this empire for 3,000 years, and in that time, I have seen countless acts of courage and sacrifice. But I have never seen anything like what you did that night. I have never seen someone fight so completely and so desperately for someone they had no reason to protect. It was my duty," Marcus said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were not quite true. "No," the Empress said. "It was not your duty. Your duty was to stand at the outer perimeter and look professional. Your duty was to represent your species in a ceremonial role that meant nothing. What you did went far beyond duty, and we both know it." She paused and looked at him with those ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall across millennia. "I have a question for you, Sergeant Cole, and I would like an honest answer. Why did you do it? Why did you stand between me and death when you could have fled like everyone else?" when you could have saved yourself and no one would have blamed you? Marcus thought about the question for a long moment before he answered. I saw that you were in danger and that no one else was going to help you. And I could not just stand there and watch you die. It is not complicated, Your Majesty. It is just what you do when someone needs help, and you are the only one who can give it. But I had treated you with contempt. My people had dismissed you as insignificant. Why would you risk your life for those who had shown you nothing but disrespect? Because that does not matter, Marcus said. And he felt the truth of the words as he spoke them. The way someone treats you does not change whether they deserve to live or die. You were in danger, and I could help. That is all that mattered in that moment. The Empress was silent for a long time, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with an emotion that Marcus could not identify. In 3,000 years, I have never had anyone, not my own guards, not my own family, not anyone, who was willing to die so completely for me without any expectation of reward or recognition. Your species lives for such a brief time, and yet you spend that time so fully. You waste nothing. You hold nothing back. She reached out and touched his forehead gently with one feathered hand. I think I finally understand something about humans that my people have been missing. You do not fight despite your short lives. You fight because of them. Every moment matters to you because you have so few of them. Every choice carries weight because you will not live long enough to make another one. Marcus did not know how to respond to that, so he just lay there and felt the gentle touch of her hand and wondered what would happen next. The Awakened Flame conspiracy has been dismantled, the Empress said. Commander Thyrol and the other traitors await judgment. The Empire has been shaken, but it will survive. And all of this is because a single human soldier refused to run away when everyone else fled. She withdrew her hand and straightened to her full height. I would like to offer you a position. Sergeant Cole, a permanent position as my personal guard. Not as a symbol or a gesture, but as a true protector. You would be the first non-Velkari to hold such a role in the history of our empire. Marcus stared at her in shock because this was not something he had ever imagined. Not something he had ever thought possible. Your Majesty, I am honored, but I am just a human. I cannot match your sentinels in strength or speed or experience. No, the Empress agreed. You cannot. But you have something that they do not have. Something that I now realize is more valuable than any of those things. You have the will to stand and fight when all reason says you should flee. You have the refusal to give up even when victory is impossible. And that is worth more than centuries of training. She smiled. And it was a strange expression on her ancient face. But it was warm and genuine. Besides, I have learned that it is good to have at least one person around me who sees threats that others miss, and who will not hesitate to act on what they see, even when no one believes them. Marcus thought about his life back on Earth, about the small apartment waiting for him, and the missions that would come one after another until he was too old to fight anymore. And then he thought about what the Empress was offering, a chance to be part of something larger than himself. A chance to matter in a way that he had never imagined. I accept, he said. The Empress nodded as if she had expected nothing else. Good. When you are fully recovered, we will discuss the details, but for now you should rest and heal. You have earned it. She turned to leave and then paused at the door. One more thing. Sergeant Cole, word of what you did has spread across the Empire. The story of the human soldier who stood alone against a traitor commander to protect and Fakin, Empress, who had never shown him kindness. My people are beginning to see your species differently now. How so? Your Majesty, they used to see humans as crude newcomers, as a young species that would burn itself out in a few millennia and be forgotten by history. Now they see something else. They see a species that runs toward danger when all wisdom says to run away. They see courage that is not diminished by mortality, but strengthened by it. She looked back at him with those ancient eyes. The Valkyrie have a saying that the true measure of a people is not how they act when they are strong, but how they act when they are weak. You were weak and alone and outmatched in every way that mattered, and you chose to stand and fight anyway. That is something my people will not forget. Marcus nodded and felt something warm spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with his injuries. Thank you, Your Majesty. The Empress smiled again, and then she was gone. And Marcus lay in his bed looking up at the crystal ceiling and thinking about everything that had changed and everything that was still to come. He had come to this planet as a decoration, a symbol of diplomatic goodwill that no one took seriously, and he was leaving it as something else entirely, as proof that humans were worth paying attention to, as evidence that a species that lived only a century could do things that species who lived for millennia could not. The great halls of the Crystal Citadel. They were already telling the story, and it would spread from there to every corner of the galaxy. And wherever it went, it would change how people thought about the small fierce creatures from a little blue planet who had only just begun to explore the stars. The story was simple, and it would be told 1,000 different ways across 1,000 different worlds. But it always began the same way when everyone else fled. A human soldier stood between the Empress and death and refused to move.